Welcome to episode 3 of Whiskey and Words. Tonight we are very thankful to have two very special guests with us to review Chinua Achebe's No Longer at Ease and also Wild Turkey, which is our gift bourbon from Sharan, who's our guest. Before we get on with any more proceedings, I'm just going to hand us over to our guests just to give us a bit of introduction about themselves and kind of, really well, that's for you guys to do.
Sure. Should I go first?
Please do.
Yeah, so I'm Sharan. I am a chef in the kind of burgeoning London vegan food scene. I'm colloquially known as Chef Ghani. And just generally, people know that I'm one of these guys that you come to for a fucking great meal,
Cool.
People around the table have kind of seen some of the incredible cooking that I've been putting out lately, and I hope that they kind of comment on it during the discussion as well. We'll pass over to Will.
My name's Will, and I'm a veterinary surgeon, small animal veterinary surgeon in the UK.
Cool. I'm looking forward to some of your insights. It's quite you don't cook the animal while he heals the animal.
Oh, no.
So yeah, exactly. Well, meat's off the menu apart from the wild turkey.
Don't worry, they're bad turkeys.
Someone else tasting the turkey?
So I'm going to hand you over to Luke, who is going to give us synopsis review of the whiskey so far.
Yeah, very, very brief synopsis, as said.
Well, let's do a bit of a guessing game.
Well, yeah, I'll introduce it briefly first. So, yeah, the Wild Turkey 101, which I've been informed was Hunter S. Thompson's favourite bourbon, apparently. 6 to 8 year oak-aged whiskey. It's got a nice little quote about it here, actually. The actual creator, Jimmy Russell, says, "It's like the Kentucky River. Wild Turkey 101 is mighty, bold, and it takes its own sweet time." Would we all agree with that?
Yeah.
So far, absolutely.
Yeah, well, what are people's thoughts?
Easy drinking is the first thing that I've got on my palate.
It's quite alcoholic. That means 50%, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing.
This is somewhere I'd like to have it where it's cold rather than a hot place.
Yeah.
Yeah, although there's not many hot places I'd want to drink whiskey.
But bourbon, I feel, is like on the rocks. I don't know. I get that kind of, a Western. You're rolling into a cowboy saloon. Maybe that's just me. Yeah.
With 101 turkeys following you.
It's totally, Kentucky.
What's the price range of this bad boy?
Oh, it's a very reasonably priced, kind of very accessible mid-market, or even kind of budget market, really. I mean, under 30 quid, which is
What was the reason you
went
for this one?
I mean, I've not had much bourbon in my life, and I'm very keen to try some because I've just never really got along with Scotch, or I haven't really had much Irish whiskey either, but I've heard it's relatively similar. So yeah, no, I thought I'll give this a go, and I think it wasn't Jack Daniels basically. So
yeah, good choice.
Should we have a go at getting the tasting notes? I have a lot of confidence in us with this.
Really?
Yeah, they've not gone too convoluted with it like a lot of them. So I think you could get all of them.
Lemon and citrus.
Okay. No, but okay. I am kind of tasting the citrus though, now that you've said that, but I don't know whether you put it in my mind, and that's why...
It's sugary, you can taste the sugar. I mean, there's a lot of caramel in there.
Maybe
honey.
Caramel is one.
Honey? Is there any honey?
Berries?
It's a lot of just sweet flavours. Most of them are just almost generic sweet flavours.
Yeah.
Vanilla?
Vanilla is another one,
Nice.
yeah, so we're up to
No,
2.
I can definitely feel that.
Licorice?
Yeah. No, that's too far.
No, that's let's say roast beef or something.
Cold.
This was like the natural progression: citrus, licorice, roast beef.
Rich mahogany?
Yeah, well, I was getting a bit mahogany.
So should I tell you
Yeah.
what the tasting notes are? Pretty simple: caramel, vanilla, which we got, toffee. I mean, all one and the same,
Yeah.
and just spice. So
That's very generic spice.
There's a
I
little
like
bit of
that.
smoke.
Yeah,
There's a little bit of smoke.
but I appreciate it.
Compared to what we had last week.
The kind of aftertaste.
Right.
Oh yeah, old smokehead. That Jesus.
Yeah.
Who brought that bad boy?
That was Matthew.
I knew it was going to be interesting when I spotted on the actual the container it came in, it just said briny. And I thought, that's exactly what I want from a whiskey.
I mean, there was a 30-word description that came with it. I swear 7 of the words were peak. Sorry.
Yeah, at least.
And another 7 were the adjective heavy.
Yeah. And without much further ado, we're going to do the book introduction. Luke?
Yeah, so No Longer at Ease is by an author called Chinua Achebe. It's actually part of a trilogy of books about colonialism in Nigeria and the gaining momentum of independence in Nigeria. I think this is the middle one. In between Things Fall Apart and Hour of God. And the actual...
No, this is the second.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Hour of God, I think, is the third. And it essentially follows a prodigious young Nigerian man who comes from a rural background, but through the charity of his village is sent to the UK to get a formal education, comes back to Nigeria to a very well-paying government job, and it follows, in a way, his conflict with a very much changing Nigeria and his own personal upbringing in a traditional environment and a world that he has been almost forced into to enter in terms of being a Western educated individual. And it's also in part a love story as well. It very much follows closely his relationship with a woman who he adores, and she is a key central part of the book.
Just throwing it out there for general thoughts.
I actually thought it was quite a predictable book. In a way, you could see
It wasn't a page
the
turner for
downfall
me.
happening.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it sets the scene that the downfall has happened from the beginning, so you know it's coming. But then there was not that much surprising in it at all. And so for me, it almost felt like a novel that didn't really go anywhere. But I think it still made some quite important statements as well, which we'll undoubtedly cover.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it introduces some really interesting themes, and whilst the pace of the book isn't necessarily kind of particularly page turning or exciting, or there's nothing that the reader is confronted with that they haven't perhaps come across before, but it's kind of bringing together together characteristics or characters that one has predicted and would be well aware of as individuals within kind of Nigeria in the 50s and 60s, but ultimately kind of without that deep dive you never really kind of dig deep and understand much about the conflicts and struggles that they have to kind of endear themselves to as a result of being who they are within that particular period.
I think possibly what this book struggles with is to non-European audiences, because you've got to try and understand Nigeria on the brink of nationalism. You've also got to understand Nigeria's imperial past, and for most readers, really the understanding of colonial Nigeria and the different types of societies that would be.
I would say that was the saving grace of the book, that it was interesting because of that. The actual central storyline, it's okay, but seeing the Nigeria at that time where everything's changing, even for the village where there's a sort of, not a war, but a conflict between Christianity and the old gods going on. There's conflict everywhere, and that's, for me, the most interesting thing about the book, is just
I think
seeing what's going on.
For me to get like a real depiction of it, I never felt I really understood the kind of dynamic of Christianity, or the dynamic of tribalism, or the dynamic of imperial. It never gave depictions of a particular
those
thing.
themes were introduced for kind of very specific purposes of essentially trying to show that kind of in kind of every aspect of both rural and urban kind of environments, you're dealing with this kind of contemporary struggle of essentially on one side you have kind of the libertarianism or kind of liberalism in general, and pushing against traditional values and trying to...
It's more so what you've got the very traditional values, and then you've got more sort of more modern values. But within the modern values, you get this more corrupt modern values, and then you get more of this idealistic modern values, and it's conflict between the three.
Yeah,
I think, because I feel like in part you could view it that there's a lot of issues almost he's treating superficially, that he doesn't, as you say, delve into in the kind of depth he could. But I feel that's actually something he does quite well, because it creates that sense of how many different directions the main character's being pulled in, how many different simultaneous changes and considerations he has in his life, and it is so many of them he has to take at face value. And I feel like if he took the time in the book to really delve into each of those issues, you'd lose that almost feeling of how frantic it was. So I think that's actually something he does well. I think he could have very easily gotten stuck in with a lot of those themes and you know, could have written for as long as he wanted about each and every one of them, but I almost think it's quite good that he had that brevity, and I think in a way that gives the book quite a good feel. That's a positive I take from it.
Did you find this book quite normal in terms of the passage of time? Because I found I would go from one page to the other and he'd gone forward by 2 months, and it was always quite regularly, you know, he'd experience one day and then he'd skip forward a few months.
Yeah,
and
the
a few
pace
months.
was.
I guess
Very,
there was
very
that
fast,
feeling
yeah.
of uneasiness about it, of kind of having to constantly be dealing with something new on a daily basis, and having to kind of shift your kind of what you're considering in any given moment, and kind of having to reassess and essentially new information. And I guess it dovetails quite nicely with kind of modern contemporary life in that sense, where kind of change is happening so regularly, and you're just having to kind of work through every single kind of underlying change and how it kind of positions you in the world around you. And I guess that was what was perhaps one of the better aspects of the book, was ultimately that kind of positioning of here is modern life, and it moves quickly, it changes, it's very adaptable, and ultimately kind of you're having to sometimes deal with these kind of antiquated Nigerian kind of, but ultimately you're there kind of running off on doing these kind of wild adventures across Lagos, and I guess that was quite interesting.
There was a lot of references to Hitler in the book as well, and obviously, yeah, linking through to the time that the book was written, and it being immediately post World War II,
1960.
Yeah, and the you know, it was you know, very.
It was before
Very different, yeah, sort of, very rapidly changing time for a lot of people around the world.
Do any of you know when Nigeria got its independence?
I think
It's
1960s, yeah.
Okay.
So this is maybe 4 or 5 years
Right, the cusp
before.
of that.
Okay. Do you get the feeling in this book that they knew they would become independent soon? I got that feeling.
Yeah.
I think you clearly meet a lot of characters in the book where it's such a driving force for them, and so, you know, they're so imbued with that desire for independence. But I didn't get the feeling there was ever that certainty. You know, I think he captures that quite well, because the time he would have been writing it, they weren't independent yet. So
It's quite intriguing that you say that. I felt like it felt like an almost foregone conclusion in the minds of the majority of people, including the kind of the English civil servants that were working within their roles as administrators of the Nigerian government.
What I found interesting was you never really get a nuanced perception of anyone that isn't educated. You know, every single character
in civil service.
Sorry, what did I say?
European.
Well, it was a European
No,
post,
it's
wasn't
called a
it?
European post, yeah, that's why.
So, I
So the
think
structure of the society at that time was, you know, kind of developed through using like a European bureaucracy. So a lot of the positions of kind of government, at least the higher branches, they would be kind of called European posts, because that's where you would have put the kind of strata of white people. Or,
Yeah.
but what I found, was quite interesting was that, you know, you never really developed anybody from a proper man, you know, European or educated, and really getting that kind of bubble and understanding what that bubble in Nigeria and how that kind of was forming. And
Yeah,
But
but then that's brought up a lot in the book. A lot of characters bring up how obviously he is book smart and he is educated and erudite, but he lacks world experience, and that becomes ultimately
obvious
his
to me.
downfall. But it's constantly brought up. Lots of different people he meets. So yes, you're clearly very intelligent and educated, but you don't actually understand the world. And I feel, you know, a lot of it is him being quite ignorant to that and dismissive. He never seems to address it. It's just something he mentions as said to him.
the book almost feels, throughout the whole novel, you're constantly getting these proverbs, which are African proverbs of. I don't know what you'd kind of compare it to in the European tradition. Would be what are those? The hare and the tortoise.
Yeah, proverbs.
Proverbs, yeah. But all of these are very specific to Africa, and the whole book feels almost like it is a proverb, using Obie as an individual to kind of reinvent the African proverb in the idea that he's this odd. Because all the proverbs use the mongoose or something. He's this odd beast in African culture, and he's being used as the example to redefine how Nigeria should. You shouldn't do what Obie did in that type of idea.
Yeah, I find it quite interesting that this again is a big theme in the book in terms of conflict between the paradigms and the different parts, the different ideologies and different identities in Nigeria, that there is this constant process of people trying to apply these ancient proverbs to the modern world, and there's this constant question of can that actually is that a good basis?
They talk about in the book, they abandoned quite a few of them because they talked about 3 generations back it was the best warrior of the village who was the praised one. Now it's the book smart guy.
Yeah, and
so
you can see that
well aware of it.
Immediate change in society that's happened, and ultimately,
I think that links through to World War II. It links through to the fact that they had all these original values, and then suddenly there's been a loss of.
World War II never touched Nigeria, though, did it?
No, but it undermined British colonialism a lot. That was the kind of catalyst.
Did they ever use Nigerians to fight in World War II?
Potentially, I'm not sure.
But in the book,
I don't think they get that far.
But in the book, it is always mentioned about the fact that Nigeria was part of, well, at least Obie's own childhood was part of the war effort. They said that if you collect this, you are putting a nail in. You're putting one more nail in Adolf Hitler's coffin.
Yeah.
Should we move on to some of the questions?
Yeah.
Sure. We'll kick. Well, if informative one. Why do you think Chinua Achebe labelled this novel or listed or titled this novel "No Longer at Ease"? And what is that kind of representing?
I think for him, he throughout the book, he's making a statement about how obviously modernity then and living in a developed world and having all this money that your parents or people from the previous generation couldn't imagine, all these luxuries that they couldn't imagine, which should make life easier. It is actually, and for the main character, makes life a lot more complicated, and it's what ties into what you were saying. That's a very contemporary problem now as well. Apparently we have this easy life, but actually it's never been as complicated. And you get it in the book where the people from I can't pronounce the name, the village and region he's from.
Mafia.
Yeah.
They seem to live in quite it's hardship, but it's also simplicity, and then they seem to manage to deal with their problems with relative simplicity. Whereas for him and a lot of the characters he comes across in Lagos and this developing world live in this extreme complexity, and it is almost this feeling about what is actually making life easier. How much better off is he than would he have been at ease back in his home village doing what they've done for generations?
I completely agree. I'll answer this with a British proverb: those who are given the most have most to give. And this is exactly the situation he's in, and of course that doesn't put him at ease because he has so much to give.
See, I see it as like a clashing of two worlds. You have Obie, who represents half of him who represents old-fashioned Nigerian values, tribal society, family, kinsman, and then you've got Obie, who has had to learn and adopt a Western or a modern worldview, and this No Longer at Ease is putting those two value ideas together, and it's the chaos in between of an individual who doesn't really know what his own ideology is.
Do you genuinely think he's that much at conflict with the ideologies?
Yes, massively.
Massively.
I
because
disagree.
I feel like he's accepting in a way, but ultimately just doesn't know how to
He's quite a mild character.
push himself
something we need to mention.
character.
This is not written in the first person, and as a result of that, we don't hear about these arguments going on in his head anywhere near as much as we would,
true.
because it's a third-person book.
For me, No Longer at Ease, it came to me that you have the whole story. The inner build called Clara, and it's all very terribly pleasant, and it's all he's having a nice time, and then there's a sequence of events that are all negative, and there's stress. It causes him stress, and starting off with Clara not wanting to marry him through various historical family ties, and his mother's death, and his money troubles, and he's at ease previously, and then these various sequences of events happen, and he's no longer at ease, and that's when he's then more susceptible to these brides.
You never get any
happen.
impression in the book that university was a particularly hard time for him.
Not at all. Not at all. That was a well, like all of us, it's a breeze.
It feels like that scholarship was a poison chalice for him, wasn't it? It was kind of, it sat there as this kind of pivotal point in his life that really propelled him into a situation where he would never really have imagined himself, coming from such a humble origins.
It's the initiating factor.
But ultimately, kind of it kind of throws him into a world where ultimately the kind of sense of traditionalism and kind of identity is ripped away from him, and ultimately he's forced to confront reality in a way that allows you to engage with the kind of contemporary ideals, and I guess that's where that uneasiness about it comes from, and I think that's reflected in the pace of the book as well. Like, I mean, the book moves quickly, and it gives you that kind of sense of unease, of kind of constantly being pushed into a situation where you don't feel like you have that control over.
Yeah. And I think, sorry as well. I think just tying into what you're saying, life has been quite easy for him up to that point. You get the impression his parents were very pleasant, very loving. Apart from he seemed to have a bit of a fractious relationship with one of his sisters, but otherwise it was all very nice. Because of his intelligence, he became a minor, a celebrity in his village. He was kind of adored. Even when they paid for him to go to university and they wanted him to do law, he kind of dismissively went, no, I'm going to do something else, and no one seemed to kick up a fuss. It seems like everything's come, actually, relatively speaking, quite easy to him. He's
now the challenge is
comparatively a nice background, a happy family. He's been given opportunities that I think he's not actually fully aware of their significance. Has managed to make his own decisions without many repercussions, and now he's almost been thrust into independent life. And it's a case where it's time he's in the true sense of the word.
How does Obie's financial hardship come about?
It's a mixture of things. The one thing that always shines out to me is he starts his job, and what does he do immediately? He buys a new car.
And the car's bought for him.
Yeah,
but he's still
for him.
He was gifted the car by the government.
Because
by
it's
the
an
senior civil
expectation,
servants.
yeah.
but he still needs to.
societal expectation that drives that position of ultimately there's no
No,
question
but
about it.
he's still expected to pay that back. And so just imagine us starting a new job after university, and first thing you do is buy a new car.
He's not expected to pay that back. There's something else he's expected to pay back. It's not the car.
It's
It's
the
the
scholarship.
insurance, isn't it?
No, it's the
The
scholarship.
The scholarship, and the car.
He tends
And
to
then no, he
blame
gets
the
no. It's not the car. He gets an allowance.
Yeah.
Of 50.
No. What happens? What happens is they just give him a letter, and the letter says he can buy the car straight away. He will pay it all back. That's what really shocked me. And he didn't. When the narrator, when he never thinks of, maybe I shouldn't buy a car. It's very expensive. He goes, oh, okay, I'll buy a car. He doesn't seem very money smart to me.
Yeah, but then he's also placed outside of Lagos, isn't he? So a car is a necessity because he's given a flat outside of Lagos. And I think it ties into that whole thing of, modern life creates all these stresses, because even though you think, a car's very easy, you've then got to deal with the reality of maintaining the car, and this amazing flat is so great, but then you've got to deal with the reality of paying the electricity, and I think it ties into this whole theme about how difficult this supposed luxury lifestyle can be, or how the perceived ascension up in the world and through the social strata can become very dangerous to some people, particularly someone who's come from a rural village where this would have been completely alien
To money.
Yeah.
One irony I liked in the book was the fact that one of the chief weapons in his kind of downfall was having to pay back his own privilege, because his village have all chipped in for him to get the privilege to be in his position of a senior civil servant in the Nigerian government, and now he's asked to pay back his own privilege, and he's just unable to do it. And
But
it's
he blames it. He blames that. Like, he blames the very thing that put him in the place that he was, which you can see, like, because his life has come very easy to him. That there's that kind of sense of like, oh yeah, you know what, like,
yeah, he's no appreciation of his own privilege.
You gave it to me. I'm just here making my own way, and like that's kind of.
And
It does annoy me sometimes he sees himself as a bit of a visionary. That he describes himself sometimes like that, but he gets annoyed about the debt.
But he's into financial hardship. Answering my own question here is part of the reason is because he's constantly sending money back to his home village.
he sends very. It reminds me of.
send much.
He does.
Well, it doesn't give figures, but he's constantly sending money.
Well, he's definitely trying to blame it as the kind of reason for why he finds himself in that situation.
But simultaneously, I think it is his own personal mismanagement
I would
of his
say
money.
actually it's society. It's just ultimately holding that office really forces him to be somebody, and yet ultimately kind of Nigeria is still a poor country in the 50s and 60s. Like, I mean, whilst the life that's portrayed feels kind of very kind of Gatsby-esque at times, or even like, I mean, ultimately it feels glamorous. It feels like, oh, he's this hot shot. He's making his way in round town. But like, ultimately, that's not actually true. Like, I mean, he's still not filthy rich, because at the end of the day, the other civil servants, they're milking off a load. And he's not, and he's just not picked up on this fact that, like, to live that life, you have to be.
What's quite interesting about Nigeria is, out of a lot of African countries, it still has the greatest wealth divide. There's some serious wealthy people in Nigeria, but there's some very, very poor.
But isn't it the same in most of the places
No,
in the world?
In Nigeria, it's even more so compared to most of Africa.
Really?
I think
Yeah,
that's
nowadays.
just because it's become such a big economy very quickly. But then I think a big part of it, and like you were saying earlier, in the sense that he is spoiled almost, and a large part of it, you can say it's society, but also part of it is his arrogance as well. He's got this, whatever it is, £50 he's paid a month, £20 has to go to the union who paid for his education, but initially they're very happy for him to have a 4-month deferral, and then he has the disagreement over the fact they don't want him to marry the woman Clara. And then even once that's reconciled and he goes back, they still offer it to him, but out of his arrogance he says, no, I'm not. I want to start paying. I still want to start paying it back straight away. And it is this sense of, when he doesn't get what he wants, he throws his toys out the pram, and
That's one way of looking at it. But on the flip side, you could say that it was a pretty cruel slight to kind of just say, hey, like, your proposed wife is the daughter of a leper, and like, we're absolutely not okay with that. Like, I mean, and that's that kind of like pushback of like, fuck, how do you work your way through that life where like,
is the point,
do
isn't
you,
it?
do you
That's how
have
it was
to
back
just
then.
full no, but that's the thing, is that like, just because that's how it was back then doesn't
Or
mean
still
that
now,
contemporary
still now.
no
Yeah.
but does that mean that contemporary Lagos actually admires or values that as a kind of way of kind of putting yourself across?
It's interesting they set it in Lagos with your flatting pot. You've got people coming in from the country, and you've got foreigners coming into one hub of Nigeria, and really this is where the ideas hub is being generated, but the rest of Nigeria maybe isn't at the same ideas.
I
And
think
it's
it's what's
not
happening in
even
China
close.
right now.
yeah, well, all over the world.
Yeah,
Should we move on to another
Yeah,
question?
we'll
Yeah.
try
yeah,
that.
let's do it.
This one comes from. I don't know. Sorry, my app isn't as quick. Let's go with. What was the role of Joseph and Christopher through Obie's journey through Lagos? This is Sharan's question, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Maybe if you can give an outline of who Joseph and Christopher are in the novel.
So Joseph, from what I was able to gather, was a kind of a childhood friend, and ultimately grew up with him, and was kind of one of the members of the Igbo tribe, and was also there with him when he moved to Nigeria. So it represents this individual that's kind of sat as that kind of anchor to the traditionalism that still existed, and whilst also Joseph is himself going through this kind of journey of having to deal with the kind of contemporary challenges that kind of city life in Lagos brings up, and then you have Christopher, this kind of this hotshot. I'm not. Was he a doctor, or he was kind of
an economist?
He was an economist and a kind of a bit of a playboy, and essentially kind of.
Wasn't he a minister as well? He was a
Was
government.
I
he was a,
don't
he was
think
a
he was a
minister
minister.
for something. I thought.
Christopher, I thought, was an economist.
I thought he had a government office though, because
Oh, really?
he was the one who was saying his assistant secretary was a white man, which I found quite interesting.
So maybe a government economist.
I mean,
yeah.
and that's a very interesting topic of just. Well, I guess there's not much to it. It's just that's a reflection of the time, isn't it? Like at that time, goes back to the point of independence being a foregone conclusion. In that kind of, by that point, it was very much the case that Nigeria was going to become independent, and the British rule over Nigeria was essentially irrelevant, and it didn't really matter, Tomlinson said, about kind of modern Nigeria, because it didn't really have any weight behind it.
What I found, which I thought was a really interesting idea, was so you go from pre-colonialization Nigeria, and it would have been very much tribal, and it had been the strength of your individual, and then you go to colonialism, where they set up a society where, in order to get to the top jobs, you had to be an educated man,
and a Christian. That's quite important.
And Christian as well. And what you see in this book is really, it's almost a country thinking, well, how are we going to become the top dogs? Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to group together, and we're going to send our smartest and our best, person who's well adept with the book, unlike being adept with the sword, which was the past values. And we're going to send him off to an English education, and then there can be no reason that he won't be able to get to this, because education was used as this kind of ability to restrict black people or Nigerians from getting to the top jobs, because they would have said, well, you need to have a degree, or you need to have...
Even British society, if we go back 100 years.
Sure,
Yeah, at the same time.
Yeah.
I think it was
But remember, free university education only started after the Second World War, was it?
Sure, but Brits didn't own your own country. So
I'm just saying it happened in Western world as well.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
University was for the wealthy generally.
Of course, but they weren't saying that, in order to have a university degree, they're the only people who can partake in ruling your own country.
I think
Well, I mean,
they
they probably
did
weren't.
in England. Yeah, definitely. It's still
Yeah, you had to be
massively elitist there.
You had to go to university to be an officer in the army.
It was actually worse in the UK, and that's why you find a lot of these British individuals who are still well educated, but maybe not to the same standard, or didn't go to the right school or the right university, coming to the colonies to find work instead.
There was also a lot of self-made men in at least the British industrial age, because if you look at the the industrial impact, it wasn't just people who came from Oxford and Cambridge. It was very much practical men of
That is true.
labour.
There's a lot of inventors and engineers who weren't university graduates, but I think.
I understand.
true.
It's
It is
still
true.
a class
I think that's a
strata.
reflection of the ideas
Yeah.
that were around. Like,
Yeah.
you weren't building on. There were so many big ideas that didn't need to necessarily build on the theory of previous ideas.
Yes, exactly.
There were so many ideas to come up with.
But
You
Will-
could just,
Will-
yeah.
Well, it's
I
completely
do-
right,
your own
because
one, yeah.
basically what Britain did was impose its own structure onto
Yeah.
Nigeria.
Yeah.
And so, it's actually, now you say it, it makes complete sense that, the same restrictions on getting to the same Nigeria.
Did you
Yeah.
ever hear in British history of a village going together and paying for one person to go to university when they were clever? I've never heard of this idea before.
I'm sure
I do
back in the
feel
day...
like we've digressed from the question about obviously Joseph and Christopher.
I
and
agree.
what
Yeah,
they,
I
what
agree.
they mean.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. But I think the thing for me is that Joseph and Christopher were not terribly involving characters. They appeared, and they made their appearance in the book, but they didn't have
I guess
in much
it's-
direction.
But who were the levers of influence for Obie throughout the book?
Well, I think
There were those kind of male bonds of friendship, because ultimately, kind of the kind of women in Nigerian society were very much sidelined just purely because of the nature of society in Nigeria, and obviously that kind of those kind of progressive values that we adhere to now
Yeah,
weren't
but
necessarily
I
kind
think
of as well established.
I think regarding Obie, I think it was more to do with the fact that he was in debt, his mum died, and the girl Clara that he wanted to be with couldn't be with him because of historical reasons.
So you take it as more of a...
There
It
was
was
that-
the actual factors that made Obie who he was, and take
Absolutely.
the bribe. See, I
Absolutely.
think the narrative is more fitting with he just wasn't able to deal with challenges in life because he'd always had a privileged status, being the most intelligent boy in the village, and this was how they were going to use being the most like in pre colonialism, being the strongest. It didn't mean that you had to be the smartest. It's there, like, having one attribute doesn't make you fit for being a leader.
Yeah.
And just because you're strong, and there's an interesting parallel here with, which is his first novel, which is Things Fall Apart, where you actually, the whole novel is out, well, the beginning of the novel is out of the eyes of one of the most physically dominant men in the village, and you see his pathway to colonialism. And when you can kind of contrast it with Obie's own path, which is, it's a different tool, but each in their own time is the most powerful.
Yeah.
I think Joseph at least highlights Obie's own personal culpability for where he ends up, in a way.
Joseph warns him many times.
Joseph is, in a book, the
That's
realist and the pragmatist. He manages to find a balance between the dynamics of the old world and the new world. He clearly, it's never mentioned that he has any real problems with living in the city, living a modern life, but he's always very cognizant of the fact you need to respect the traditions and listen to the union and see talkmen. And he's the one who seems to be, even though they've, he grew up in the same village as Obie but didn't have the same opportunities as him, has found a more sustainable life in Lagos. He's the one who, when Obie's completely broke and has alienated the union, is the one that organises the reconciliation meeting, buys the beer for him to give them. And so I think he, in a way, highlights how dysfunctional Obie is, how unready he is for this world, whereas Joseph has said, he clearly is involved in the modern evolving Nigeria, but simultaneously appreciates the foundation where they've come from, how important that still is.
He does come across as a bit of a child on reflection. Now you've said that.
But I guess, like, the issue that we have here is that, like, what are we saying, that ultimately Obie shouldn't represent elitism. He shouldn't represent kind of progressiveness. He should ultimately play his part because that's what society expects him to. And I guess, like, is that fair? Is that fair to expect anybody, especially given the kind of gilded character that he has found himself in, and whilst he might not have the attributes to hold leadership and hold kind of elitism in a way that progresses Nigerian values to be the kind of the best in the world, as what would the Nigerian elite would aspire for. Like, ultimately, is it kind of okay to expect somebody just to fall in line just because...
You bring up a question. If you want to make positive change, do you go against the system, or do you
rewrite the system?
Do you go do you follow the system but just change it slowly and surely?
So
Yeah.
I think for me the take on Christopher and Joseph are very much that clash of two ideologies. You've got Christopher, who is this new Lagos, we're living the high life, and then you've got Joseph, who is very much kinsman and old-fashioned values.
Yeah.
And you see those again. It's that idea, of these are two almost devils and angels, and I don't think there's a morality between the devil or angel, but it's two people clashing in Obie's own conception of the new world.
Yeah, and there's a lot in the book about the loss of traditional values. Near the end when he's trying to go see Clara in the hospital, and he doesn't. It's understandable. He wants to go see her, so he kind of pushes through the nurse and then tries to force his way in. And she calls him a beast of no nation, which I found quite interesting. And it's that concept of how amplifying a country that's changing so much, and it's a fact where if you want to keep the traditional values, you can't pick and choose. If you want to retain that, then part of that is going to be the fact that in the traditional view, Clara's place is I've forgotten what it's called, Osu, obviously. Osu, makes it impossible for them to marry, and so I think it's Obie's, I think, is quite an arrogant, petulant character, but he's quite a useful character to throw up those kind of contradictions and those questions about very quickly.
I don't feel he's arrogant, because he always feels surprised.
I see him as innocent.
I
see him as arrogant.
He seems surprised that it's like he feels like he's talking to a female version of himself. Obviously, like as in how a lot of people go around the world. Everyone assumes that when the person you meet is you, but it's this the same different version.
I see him as like a dog learning new tricks as the book goes on. He's just learnt this English trick, and then he's been come up with his African being intelligent. Then he's gone to England, he's learnt this trick, and now he's having to try and perform these tricks, and doesn't really know what trick to.
It's like he likes Clara, but Clara's got this morale standpoint. The standpoint from a morale point of view of being an Osu,
but when you look at
just like, why can't we?
Do you not think that's linear? Do you not think it's too linear to think like that? Because that's
how it's written.
Yeah, I know.
That's how it's written.
Sorry, guys. Big question. How true do you think the love between them is?
So I think he
because
likes her.
I don't think Clara likes him anywhere near as much as he likes her.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it feels like a relationship of convenience for her more than anything.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
Because when I read the first passage of the book, and he talks about meeting Clara he meets Clara for the first time in a dance in England, and he's so nervous he stands on her feet many times, and she's not going to have any of him and walks away, even when he tries to say thank you for the dance. And then the reason they get into the relationship is the boat back to the UK.
Absolutely, via Madeira. Oi, oi.
Which is maybe, a 3-week journey?
Yeah.
By the way, open invites, probably November.
Yeah, November.
we're going to recreate this whole scene.
This is publicised.
Playing Obie. Okay, so what's everyone's thoughts on what's the name of this bad boy? It's
Wild Turkey 101.
Wild Turkey 101.
It's a wild turkey, that's for sure.
Yeah, very well. It's very strong.
Our glasses have somehow gotten fuller the more we've drank.
Yeah.
And it's now empty, the bottle, wherever it is.
We are on the verge of finishing this bad boy.
Wait, the bottle? Where's the bottle?
You know what? It's very drinkable, isn't it? Quaffable, you might say.
Yeah.
It's a good whiskey.
It's a nice social whiskey. There's nothing.
That's exactly it.
It's
It's
good
like
choice,
social.
Graham.
It's
It's a good
bloody social, isn't it? Like, you just fucking throw it back.
It's a
Don't
basic
even
bitch.
fucking
like you said.
recognising that you're getting drunk. It doesn't fucking matter, because you're just around the table just recording a fucking nobody podcast.
You know what would make these ice cubes better? If they just had a hole all the way through the middle and you could just use them like a straw.
Absolutely.
That'd be
I'm
alright.
sure that must be invented.
True, it only lasts for about 5 seconds though.
But nonetheless,
A
you get
great-
to-
No,
you get
it
to enjoy
could be a massive ice cube,
But then it would look
and then it's there like half the like the whole glass, and then you've just got this.
surely that would look phallic.
Yes, but I mean,
You're not comfortable in
yeah.
that?
What's wrong with that?
I'm just saying you go to a high-end cocktail bar, which already sounds a bit phallic, and then you've got an ice cube.
What
which
type of
looks the
cocks are you tailing tonight? Like
I don't normally
White
drink
Russians?
cocktails.
He's a
Good
porn
man.
star
There must be a
martini.
cocktail you like.
there must be a cocktail that you like.
Cocktail you
What
like.
about a Bloody Marys?
Wait,
You
my
must like
cock
Bloody
fell
Marys.
out the glass.
It's a recovery drink.
It's
It
true.
is a
It is a
recovery
recovery drink. Yeah.
Yeah, but you go
Long
to...
Island iced tea, everybody likes
Would
that.
anybody
Because
like
No,
No,
no way.
Would anybody like
No.
some floor cock?
There's a few right answers here. There's about 2 or 3, I think.
Okay. Vodka martini, shaken not stirred.
Oh.
we've got James Bond.
It's just called martini, shaken or not stirred.
Well, you can get a gin martini.
I know, but in the movies,
Yeah.
he never says vodka martini.
I feel like the Negroni is the one size fits all. Like you just throw it out there, like nobody's gonna be annoyed.
I like a whiskey sour.
I do feel the book is a bit of a Hollywood special, similar to the Peugeot 207.
What's the...
As in, it's it has a spectacular finish. You know, when it explodes and there's the engine oil and the
The Peugeot 207 is the most generic car ever.
well, exactly, and it explodes with great gratitude. You know, it's it just absolutely rips.
What are you doing to the car?
Yeah.
Well, I wish I had a video to show you, but
But the police took it away.
well, it has been sold. It has been sold to We Buy Any Car for £400.
For
Wow.
400.
£425.
I thought you said you got it like 1,500 or something.
No, it wasn't. It was 1,000 new. Or old.
Right.
Or old.
Fine.
But yeah, it was
It was 1,000 you with
Straight
7,000
off
miles.
and it had 12 brake horsepower, and then when it died, it was a spectacular finish.
A 12 brake horsepower.
Well, all the horses were let out of the engine.
Oh, so it had, well, like 8 horsepower?
No, well, it had 98. And
Oh,
then,
wow.
but originally, but it had 12 at the end.
Okay, well that moves me on to our next question of the evening. And this comes from our friend Luke. How significant is religious conflict in the novel? Do you want to kick us off where this question came from?
Yeah. So it's not that I think it is significant, but obviously it's touched on a lot, especially when he goes back home, and you certainly see that distinction between the older generations who still very much hold the religion that's been educated as Christians, and there clearly is this conflict and difference of opinion that is constantly needing to be mediated in terms of what God is, what. But it's. I mean, I again, it's one of those things which he touches on and maybe could delve into more, and I think it's a good thing he doesn't delve into it more because it creates that.
I think something
frantic
interesting
feel to
I
the
found
book.
about it is his parents. So his parents are Christians, and they never taught him the old religious stories when he was young, and this is brought up. And one of the reasons, when he's trying to marry a girl from another tribe, he doesn't think his parents are going to be that annoyed because they are Christians. They should give up this whole some more tribal pagan view, but they are still trying to walk a tightrope, the parents, between the old traditional, and I find that really interesting as what the tightrope the parents are trying to
Can they say that Christianity is not pagan?
No,
No.
but their old religions would be
It's
classified as pagan.
It's the
Okay.
tribal religions that supersede that.
Again, it's
Well,
it goes back to
supersede
the
that.
narrative. It's a clash of two civilizations, and you've got Christianity, which is the West, and you've got pagan. I still think is a Western tradition, but more African, spiritual,
tribal religion.
tribal
Yeah, I don't
religion.
think it's fair to say pagan because a lot of Christianity was based off paganism. So.
And
But I think we need to stop getting so lost in the tumbleweeds here. I feel like the distinction doesn't really matter. What I feel like is that it's about impressions of the past and like the kind of
What is taught the people?
essentially the British came along and left an impression of the past, and it left a very strong impression, and it's very strongly alluded to in Things Fall Apart, in that ultimately the introduction of Christianity almost caused the absolute breakdown of tribal society altogether. And then essentially what happens after that is you get a further layer of kind of impression where, like, from kind of late 1950s Britain, you have, I guess, something that's not necessarily akin to what we have today, but like, I mean, if you look at what was happening in the 60s in the UK, you had a very liberal movement, and so towards the late 1950s, you'd have had that kind of slight progression away from conservatism conservatism and towards kind of the liberal movement that you had in the 60s. And as a result of that, you're seeing that impression
But
being
isn't this an
pushed
expression of
onto
impression of the future?
Yeah,
Rather than
absolutely.
an impression of the past. So this is again, it goes back to the two ideas. You've got the past Nigeria approaching the future independent Nigeria, where it's going to have to rule itself. And what system of governance, what system of religion, what system of ethics, what system of everything is it going to form itself to become a new independent nation?
And
But I think
therein
this
lies but therein lies the vision of the UK that we see today in itself. Of like, you have this kind of large proportion of the country that are still very Christian. They're still very kind of stuck behind the ideas of the UK being a Christian country and like being kind of ultimately held together by this idea of we unite underneath the Queen and we believe in the Church of England and yada yada yada. And then on the other side you have this kind of massively liberal movement. And so essentially you're seeing that impression being pressed onto 1950s Nigeria, which is incredible that those impressions were being pressed back then, and yet we can still see that being reflected in today's society in England, where supposedly this culture is actually being formed.
I feel like we're talking very broadly here.
Yeah.
And then, my question was more...
I'm here for.
It's obviously touched on a lot in terms of religion and the fact there's conflict there. But, how do we think beyond face value, actually, it plays into the book a lot more? Or do we think it's actually almost just this side note, him just contextualising? Because I feel, especially with, obviously, the main character, he makes mention that he doesn't really follow his Christian beliefs
He
anymore,
lost his religion when he was at university.
He doesn't believe in the traditional tribalism either. So he raised this question where he's just become this neutral ground almost between the two.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of
but
modern
it's-
Brits find themselves.
Not even modern. Our parents' generation, our parents' generation. It's been a
Not
long...
our parents.
Oh, possibly.
Yeah, our parents' parents.
Atheism
That's right.
came out of something, and if you think about Obie, he is a very niche of a niche. He's not your everyday man. He is very much. He is that 1%. Or maybe not. Well, 1% in Nigerian society.
But that's the
probably.
thing, he's still one of us if he was around us today, though, wouldn't he be? I would say. I think he'd fit in perfectly.
And not in the. I don't think in the context of Nigeria, because it's mentioned in the book how, he earns in a month what some of his kinsmen back home would earn in a year. And when you contextualise that and then try and think of, say, the difference between someone in the UK out in Gloucester who would earn
any of
£30,000
us
a year,
earning
and someone
100 times more than minimum wage.
Yeah, and
That's
someone
just-
in London earning £360,000 a year is a very big distinction, and I think that kind of emphasises the
It
distinction.
really shocked me about the book when he was talking about being able to go to university and being able to pay off university in 4 years. For me, that was incredible. Like, no one pays off their student loan in the UK
But he wasn't
in 4
able
years.
to. He wasn't able to.
He wasn't able
But
to.
then that's a
But
reflection
if he...
of us being really fucked, I would say. Like, if you look at our generation immediately preceding us...
What it shows
They
is
had a
back then
much
is the
better
payoff
chance
of
of
having a
investing.
degree was incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Well,
It was.
as-
It was.
As
But it's
much-
clear there was a lot of money involved. I mean, they gave him £800. He was in a very high-paying job, earning £50. So it would have been, a year and a half's earnings in his high-powered job. So it's clearly a big investment from his village.
Yeah.
It's
Well, one question I'd like to go on to. What do you think were the factors, and what do you think was the culture, and what was everything that led to him actually taking the bribe in at the end of the novel?
It's just pure desperation. It's something that I think, every person. It's a very relatable point when you're put in a difficult situation. Your principles become a lot looser, and that's a fact of the modern world that we see every day.
So you think it's pure? You don't think there's a cultural? That it's just pure desperation.
I think there's obviously a lot of social commentary in there about bribery in Nigeria, and I think that feeds into a question we're probably going to cover later about the kind of difference between colonialism and Nigeria moving towards independence and what that looks like and how he presents that in the book. But I think for him it is just more the personal circumstance. It's is when he actually becomes his most relatable, because before that you kind of do look at him, like we've talked about, this kind of like, naive character, a bit, at least I thought, arrogant, childish character. But then that situation you appreciate, because when you're put in those difficult situations,
Sure.
you'll do things you wouldn't normally do.
But, I mean, the change is so massive. In 50 pages, for example, he is presented with the exact same scenario of the potential to take a bribe and to take a woman to bed.
But is that
And in that 50 pages, he goes
Outright
completely
say no.
the opposite. And
Yeah.
are you saying that it was the pressures
Yeah,
of...
but well, in answer to your question, I would say it's more to do with the progressive pressure that he's under through
Yeah.
his mum's, as I've said from the beginning, his mum's death, Clara saying, well, not even Clara saying anything, but as in Clara saying they can't get married, that's linked through to the family history. And
And World War II.
not only
Lot of debt.
World War II, not only World War II, but there is a further point that I can't remember right now.
Ultimately, I
Sorry,
think
I
that
threw
further
you off
point
there.
therein lies is just his flippant nature of his character. He doesn't have any strong views. He is this kind of boy of kind of everything's been gifted to him. So by virtue of that, he's just like, well, you know what? Like, fuck it. I don't care. I'm just gonna take what I can get.
For me, this... Sorry.
Yeah, no, first, you first.
See, for me, this is what I think the whole book really is kind of touches on, is when you're presented with two conflicting ideas and two conflicting ideologies, you lose all morality, because you don't know which path is the Western intellectual, that's the correct path, or if I pursue my own kinsman path, whether I'm going to be valued as an individual, as a person. I think you see right at the end, all of these paths have been completely removed from Obie. He doesn't have a sense of identity, and so his whole moral compass is just, well, screw it, I've just got to live for myself.
Yeah.
I think that's the real tragedy of the
Sorry, a
book.
more pragmatic thing. If he hadn't taken that first bribe, what would have happened?
How do you mean?
Well,
The first bribe he took, if he hadn't taken that bribe, what would have happened?
yeah, but that's the wall, isn't it? It's like, when
Yeah.
you take drugs.
Because then you just start
gateway-
speculating
it's like
beyond
gateway
the
drugs.
book, and then you can't...
Okay,
I don't
okay,
think
fair
so.
enough, fair enough.
Well, I think actually it raises an interesting question in terms of, because part of the book obviously is him, at least character making a statement about Nigeria being dysfunctional because it's got this system of bribery, and it is presented as a very Nigerian problem, at least in his view. And it's that contrast between, well, is it a Nigerian problem or is it just, a development problem where when you become someone like Odie that
Maybe we
gets
should
in this...
throw your question out there,
Do you-
which is, I think, a really interesting question. I think this is the one that you had about post-colonialism.
Yeah.
Would we say Achebe expresses a sympathetic view to colonialism at any point? Was that
I suppose my thinking on this was that throughout the book it's almost addressed a lot that that Nigeria isn't ready to run itself, is dysfunctional, it's not got the systems in place, the people that are in positions of power. Obviously the character brings us up by thinking of old Nigerians as these ones who are so corruptible.
Yeah, again,
and there's this great validity, obviously, in what Achebe's seeing and how he's presenting it, because if you look at the historical facts, Nigeria, once it was independent, was just this conglomeration of lots of different ethnic groups, lots of different regions that should have by their own right been independent countries, thrown together, and they did end up having a pretty major civil war because of it, and had years of, even beyond that, quite a dysfunctional government and democracy. So, it's certainly he's presenting valid problems that had a conclusion or had an output that justified his thoughts. But I think for me, he doesn't seem to have this, particularly considering the time he wrote it, he doesn't have this patriotic view of, he's not trying to say, yeah, Nigeria needs to be independent. He seems...
He was neutral, wasn't he, really?
Nigerian system, yeah.
He kind of gave...
Obie was, yeah.
No, but it's in, sorry, the author, writing Obie's character, there was both flaws in the English system or European system, which really just propelled Europeans to take the top jobs. But there was also massive flaws in... And there's a lovely contrast where you have Obie and Joseph meeting these two Irish girls.
That's Christopher.
Was that Christopher meeting these two Irish girls and them saying, the Irish girls saying, well, we can't see you anymore because you're black, basically, summarised. And then you have his own family saying, well, you can't see your wife or your wannabe wife because she's from a certain tribe that isn't correct. And you
there's examples of racism whole way through the novel.
Yeah, but I think
or tribalism.
It's going back to the colonialism point. It's that fact. He casts the negative light on all the potential outcomes of an independent Nigeria by flagging all these people and even the character himself, the fact he becomes corrupted, and also I think the way he presents Mr. Green, who's obviously his boss at the senior civil service, a British guy who is quite belligerent, quite hostile. Is often talked about barking orders, but then it talked about that even though he doesn't believe in Nigeria, he works so hard for it, and he's so dedicated, and he has this sense of duty, and it almost sees the character who's presented in one of the most positive lights in the book. Because even though he clearly doesn't believe in this independent Nigeria, he works so hard to make it better and try and actually improve it. And it never gets questioned that he's immoral or that he's part of this bribery scheme. He's actually just dedicated to his job. And so you get these contradictions, I feel, not contradictions, but these contrasts where for Achebe, he seems to almost see it as he's writing the book that there's going to be a lot of chaos coming out of the end of colonialism. It's a clash of two worlds,
isn't it? You've got values of the European system, which Obie likes, and there's values of kinsmen and actually family, but that he doesn't find so present.
The clashes we see in this book are never violent.
No,
absolutely ever violent, and they will go on to be violent in years in the future. But this is. But they're peaceful now.
I feel they have been violent. I feel like this.
But this is the thing: is that I think that. And this is slightly the problem with viewing this book as a singularity rather than looking at the trilogy as like a part of a bigger. And it's annoying that I'm able to come with this intervention, but in the first book, there's a lot of introducing the British as these kind of colonizers. They disrupt the traditional values. They disrupt the pre-existing order, and then they enforce and entrench their new order, and by virtue of that, adaptation attempts to be quick. Of course it does, because at the end of the day, Nigeria in the 50s is still able to recognise that the Brits are producing or introducing constructive...
But equally Britain has changed from its proper imperial days.
Constructive social constructs that will allow Nigeria to be better. But ultimately, making that change and infiltrating that change across every strata of society is impossible, because you can't make it happen quickly, because people have entrenched views. They still hold on to tribalism, they still hold on to traditionalism, and at the end of the day, like, the British way of life in the 50s was not necessarily right either. It's just, it was a more constructive or more economically productive way of running things.
But let's just go back to the question. So, what are people's views? Yes or no? Do you think he was pro or against colonialism?
No, I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that binary. I'm just saying.
No, I know, but this
where on the spectrum? Do you think?
Exactly.
I think he was so neutral about it.
Yeah,
completely indifferent.
It was almost like you could look at the entire thing and say, this is what it looked like in the mid-90s. This is what it looked like in the early 1900s. This is what it looked like in the mid-1900s, and this is what it looked like in the late...
The way he writes is almost like a scientist.
I was saying different as well.
But there's a scientific precision with a lot of the emotions. Obie, he does feel very robotic in the way he responds to individuals.
If anything, the story feels weak because at the end of the day, the author feels no emotion towards the character. He just recognises the character as a reality.
No, but the author is the character.
No,
Because
the
author.
I don't think so at all. I think Achebe is a lot wiser than that.
Nigerian. The author is a Nigerian. He was born in the 90s.
Do we know actually anything about the author?
Yeah, the author died in 2013 in Massachusetts, Boston.
So he
was born in Nigeria. Yeah, at around the same. Well, before.
Achebe lived
quick
through
maths.
the majority of the periods that you wrote about.
He was a young male at the same time. He
wrote, of course, because he wrote the book in the 1960s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, I'm just looking at how the trilogy kind of comes together, because obviously I've read Hour of God, which was written later, but it's actually about
before,
the 1920s. Yeah. And I think that book as well kind of feeds into what we're saying, and I'd agree with neutral rather than indifferent on his feeling, but I think he's just very good at casting the true complexities of the situation. So he does that very well in this book in a lot of ways, and then the other one I've not read, Things Fall Apart, but the Hour of God one I've read is very similar in that it focuses all on a tribal chief and obviously his loss of influence and power in colonial Britain as people transfer to Christianity, and there's this whole new gravitas in the world they're existing in, and this is a lot more, I don't know what you call it, centralisation in the way they live, and a lot more control over how they can dictate their own lives. But simultaneously in that book, the central character, the chief, is someone who's incredibly flawed as well, and doesn't help himself. He's incredibly pretentious about his position. He's incredibly kind of arrogant, obnoxious about his position. And so I think this is one thing, especially for the time he's writing it, that Achebe is very good at in being that neutral and stepping back for a Nigerian man as well, who must have been so personally involved and so personally invested.
Do you think this is why the West liked these novels? I mean, for me, I always see the side of, Achebe's, it's the African trilogy. Yeah. And do you think maybe it's because he was so neutral that the West had a kind of a taste for it? Or do you think it was because of the writing?
Well, has the West had a taste for it?
No, but it never has. Africa still is this unknown continent to the West.
Literature-wise, it is.
I think as well it probably had a lot of exoticism to people, because the thing is, even though he's writing in a modern or contemporary style for his time, there's so much in there that would have seemed so far out there for people in terms of bringing in all the proverbs and all these kind of like terms and the different dynamics of tribalism in Nigeria, which people wouldn't have come across, which I'd never really come across and didn't understand.
Yeah, I think that was part of the magic of it all, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
That's also been criticised.
That's
also been criticised. Like, a lot of the time, a lot of the books talking about absolute nonsense.
But
it's kind of like hours and hours.
It's about feeling that association with, like, oh well, this is a guy that actually lived through it all.
No, but it's also not. I wouldn't say it's a narrative that is anti-colonial, which maybe that's why in the West it's picked up. Which is I don't know.
Probably for his time there was,
because especially in the '60s,
I feel views. I feel probably still people writing.
I mean, there would be Mr. Greens, who would have been the owners of the biggest publishing houses in Europe.
Yeah.
And, for you to write a novel that just slates off everybody who was involved in the white apartheid of Nigeria or any other country, you
wouldn't have sold well.
Exactly, would not have sold well.
But if you're indifferent to it,
exactly,
people are going to be very interested in that.
Well, it sells to both an authentic African market and also, as well as also the European market.
Yeah.
My view is he does. The reason I asked the question is I think he does have sympathy to colonialism and appreciates some of the qualities it brought, but obviously simultaneously it's just something that isn't sustainable, isn't right, and that's something that comes through in the books as well.
Something I was expecting to get in this book, which didn't happen, was colonialism to be blamed for corruption. I was expecting...
It is, though. So the reason why I do think it is, because if you look at the strata of society, you have to have an education, which means you have to go to a European university.
Yeah,
in order to get
that tier,
in order to get to the
bribes.
tier, in order
Yeah.
to be in a position of influence. So by monopolising the education system, they monopolise the power.
Yeah. And I think
system.
there's this implication in the book about, obviously, one thing colonialism did is take Nigerian and all these different rural ethnic groups
that's a
and
very
just
good
threw
question.
them into it.
But-
And into a world they were not ready for.
There was one moment in the book where they talked about this guy falling asleep in his job, and the
The
fact
bus driver.
the bus driver.
Well, no, it's Sharan Jason Ghani.
No, they were talking about this post office guy falling asleep in his job, but they give him an extra £20 to pay for him to get a new job because he didn't pay the previous bribe for him to get his previous job, and so the tribes are already sort of in on it with jobs which aren't so significant.
Well, I mean, the
Yes,
fact
absolutely
that
But
right.
they link
Absolutely
that
right.
up. They talk about how it's they link it and they justify it through the whole idea of, you give the kola nut, which is a very traditional thing in Nigerian society. You give the kola nut to somebody and that helps the situation, and the kola nut is just replaced with money. And he does talk about that and touch upon it, that they kind of link it into a traditional way of life.
it's very much tribalism, as in, like, we need our brethren, our kinsmen, to do well in order for us to do well. And even if, like, for example,
But
the fact
that is
that
one of the really interesting questions it brings up is, does colonialism being there, is that what is the really instigator of
Oh, mate. Oh, no. I'm sorry. Who expects that?
The next question
I
is:
do want to be bit-
could we classify this as an ice cream? Yeah, with that much head, could we classify that as
I'm
an
happy
ice
that
cream?
Sharan's gone for next bit.
one
It is
question,
interesting.
one question I think's a good one is, how does Clara's abortion affect Obie?
I don't think it affects him that much. He's still acting quite selfishly about it. He just seems more concerned about the fact she doesn't want to see him.
Isn't that it? He's just such a product of his environment that, like, fuck me, there's nothing that affects him.
I mean, at the start of the book, you actually relate to Obie,
yeah.
but by the end, you just think he's this
lost
lost soul of nothingness.
Yeah.
Mm.
But it's,
And
that
I
feels
think-
really rude about Obie.
But is that not actually just a reflection of, like,
Say Obie's
many of
really
us
rude
live?
person.
No, we're just
No, I think when you combine his kind
a
of
mirror.
his
when you-
aspirations for greatness combined with his culture that wants him to look after other people, he is in this conflict zone of not really knowing who he
But
wants
are we
to.
saying that Christopher is a deeper character?
No, I'm saying Christopher is an amoral,
And
horrible
that's
being.
but that's what we're saying, is that, like, if Christopher's allowed to exist,
But Christopher and also the other character, I can't remember.
Joseph.
Joseph, yeah. But
Joseph
they
is like the
also-
moral,
but
like.
they also know who they are as individuals. One is Christopher, who is just part of Lagos society, and he wants to live that life. And Joseph also wants to be part of his own
What
society.
we're saying is that we shouldn't analyse Lagos society, and we shouldn't analyse, like, modern contemporary city living at all, because
Yeah,
like,
but isn't
No,
that
we-
it's
we
just
are.
a
It is actually.
vapid, empty expanse of nothingness. And then, like, but we should definitely read into who.
I don't think the way Obie is narrated, anyone is saying tribal life is beneficial. I think there's both benefits with Lagos life. Well, the fact that you're able to marry freely, it's basically the individual v the community is what you're
Yeah.
saying right now.
Yeah.
If you're going to base
Yeah,
it down
yeah.
onto two different principles, and ultimately, it's a huge conflict. You either give up your community in order to pursue your own individual aspirations and be the person, like you want to study English, like you want to pursue your own role in the civil service, like you want to do all these other things, or you pursue your community, you lose your wife, lose your lover, but you lose your family at the same time, There's a real...
I'm going to sound very rude at this point. So obviously he has this love for this girlfriend, which is unallowed with the tribal laws that were there. But my genuine feeling is, if he wasn't going so headstrong into it, if he'd allowed this relationship to continue for 5-10 years, culture would have changed and it would have been okay.
Yeah, but
He was going. He was so. I don't know that.
And does
But
that
I
make a
always
difference?
think he was going in
Does
so
that make a
headstrong.
difference?
Sure, but
He
he's
was
a
so-
naive boy. Like that.
Yes, and that's what my feeling for the whole novel. He's so headstrong. That
But
he
because
doesn't
he's
allow-
been filled with this greatness, aspirational greatness. Look, you are the next great thing of this tribe because you can read English very well, you can do maths very well, you can do all the things that the colonialists could do well, and you're even better than the colonialists. So now you are given the world, you should be able to destroy it. But actually, no, just because you're good at reading a book doesn't make you a great leader.
Doesn't buy you influence.
Yeah.
There's no answer to that.
Yeah,
There's no answer to
well,
that.
I think it's a very good question.
What, your own question?
Yes. You're absolutely right. I think it's a very good question. I don't think that's it. Like, I think it's a very good question.
Which question would the abortion question?
Yeah. As in, from the abortion of Clara, Obie really just almost divulges. Well, it does divulge into the
abstract.
Well, I guess the
Yeah,
question is, do
I
we
mean,
think
like-
it was a catalyst for him accepting the bride?
Yeah,
Do
well,
you think
yeah,
without
sorry,
that,
the
he wouldn't
catalyst
have
is the
accepted
right
the
word.
bride?
No,
I think he was on that path anyway.
Yeah.
I think by that point he'd actually become so emotionally numb.
But
That he
it was
was on
one
that
of
path
3
anyway.
stages. And
Okay, but can I? I'd like to ask a subsequent question. Did he have any other choices?
No, he didn't.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
did.
but think
He
about
did.
it.
Really?
So,
Did he?
yeah, but
Why-
so
why-
That's given the
this
circumstances.
the
like,
abortion. Okay, so his death, and then his financial difficulties. And for me, they're the 3 factors that result in him taking, as I've said from the start, that results in him taking the.
No, so let's just go. In my perspective, if we go a step back before we go even to the abortion, we before we even go to the mother's death, and before we go into the financial difficulties.
Okay.
Say, for example, he adopted a Kingsman view, where instead of going in his own old worldy lifestyle, he completely adopted.
Pointed
at-
at me.
No, I was going old world
Okay,
life.
You pointed at me.
Sorry, I didn't mean to point to you.
Okay.
But before we went to the new world, and he said, "I'm going to represent the Kingsmen no matter what." So, in order to do that, I'm definitely not going to marry anybody who is goes against the Kingsmen. I'm going to represent their interests. So, actually, they won't mind me
He's
paying.
idealistic.
So, this is what I'm
He's
saying: is that if he
idealistic.
chose the path of going with his own culture, he would have been fine. And also, if he chose the path of going completely against his own culture, he'd have been fine. It's paving this middle ground that has led him to not being at ease with life.
What? He isn't at ease.
Well, no longer at ease,
No,
yeah.
I would agree with you there.
I think
I'll
now
agree
is the
to
time to
that.
go with Matthias's question. By the way,
Okay,
It's a
this,
fucking sick question Matthias came up with.
yeah, this
I
is
think we've nailed it then.
this is
Matthias.
Matthew's
It's a
question.
very simple question.
It is, but it's.
How do you think other individuals would have coped if they'd been put in Obie's situation?
The reason I say this is when I looked at Obie's situation to begin with, he had been put in this privilege. He went to university in the UK, and he comes back, and he can earn serious dollar compared to what locals can. And there's an expectation.
Well, he should have stayed in England.
No. There isn't that expectation, he says. There's an expectation he comes back. But the fact that he can pay his university... he can pay the university tuition off in 4 years. And
Surely he can't, because the education costs £800, so he must be on £50 a month then.
£50 a month, £20
Okay.
goes to, or is meant
Yeah,
to go to the
so-
union.
Okay.
So 40% goes to the union, which paid off his university degree. But then he goes and buys a car.
No,
brand
the
new.
car
That was
allowance.
given to him.
that
That was
I don't.
No,
I-
it's not given
It
to you.
is.
It isn't.
I would say that point is much more about.
Let's
not talk over each other.
Well, an also cinematise, I must say, is that for it to be disputed, it must be a minor point.
I think it's a good question because we've all found it very easy to be very critical of him throughout this entire novel. I mean, most of our discussion has been hypercritical of him. He's not a good bloke, but it's the fact where
is he a real man?
He's not a good bloke. But you do imagine yourself, if you picture yourself, which is Matthias's question, in his situation, if you have this upbringing where you are special and chosen and a celebrity in your village, and you enter that situation, there's so many relatable factors to it, you know, overreaching yourself financially, being too frivolous, being too eager with love, allowing yourself to be absorbed into your new life rather than, you know, looking back and then focusing on family. That's something that young people go through all the time.
Exactly. He's the modern day hipster, isn't he?
So I think it's a really good question by Nat,
because a lot of people, with the situation he's been put in, having to pay for his university degree, having to pay for his parents, when I looked at his finances, if someone had been frugal and not had...
Matt did an audit.
Yeah. I did do an audit. I did an audit. And if he hadn't...
Get this spreadsheet out.
I'm so sorry, I did an audit. But
why couldn't he do this with 1958?
He got a 60...
Sorry. Okay, so that leads us very nicely to the end of Whiskey and Words. Thank you for all the audience for listening to this point, which is a rarity. I doubt we will have got this far, so many thanks. But I'm gonna throw it out for really the last review, and it's going to be for both the whiskey and our book tonight. So I'm gonna throw it to our guests. How would you rate the whiskey if you're gonna go 0 to 10?
I would say a 9 out of 10.
9 out of 10.
Oh, it was a very, very good drink.
Wow, that's a very good hallmark.
The whiskey? Are you kidding me? It was very, very good.
The whiskey was a fantastically easy drink, and I think that's what's nice about it. And I think like going any deeper than that, like you're not gonna get any like deep, meaningful, like oh wow, you got some fantastic peatiness or whatever.
I think it's rare to get as good as we've got tonight.
Okay, and the book?
The book's 7 or 8, I would say personally. Will Trustwell, veterinary surgeon.
7 or 8. So if you're going to give a definitive 7.5?
Considering the calibre of conversation, 8.
8.
I mean, it's been great, gentlemen. It's been great.
It has been great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I like that the conversations fed the rating as well.
Of course. Like, you know, not only have we understood Obie and his girlfriend Clara, we've also understood Nigeria and its continent.
And we've all found out a little bit more about ourselves along the way.
Well, absolutely. Yeah.
Sharon?
Oh well, I mean, at the end of the day, I think Will covered all the ground that I was hoping to be honest.
So if you're going to give a ranking out of 10?
It was a very, very okay book. It could have been... at the end of the day, it falls in the middle of a trilogy. So therefore, kind of the Twin Towers, isn't it?
Twin Towers is a great book.
Yeah, the Twin Towers
is a trilogy that is the Twin Towers.
Just that very concise rating.
Yeah, but like...
A new conspiracy theory.
The Return of the King is a really great book, and the Fellowship is like a great introduction. And like the Twin Towers sits in the middle of like...
You're just basing it on the films, aren't you?
And then you had like Legolas like smashing some fucking orcs through the middle.
Okay, so out of 10...
Banging.
So to raise the question again, we'll probably have to edit this.
No edit.
Yeah.
No edit.
If I was going to say, you know, so let me just ask my question. So Sharon, If you're gonna rate this, what's your thoughts?
Like 5.5, maybe 6. 6 is a kind. It's a kind 6, maybe a 5.5.
So you rated the whiskey?
Oh, it was great, easy drinking shit. Like
So the whiskey was better than the book.
the thing is, I don't.
So it must be an 8, Shram. It must be an 8.
Okay. We're gonna move on to the tried and tested.
The true
connoisseurs.
professionals.
Yeah, with very
Should I,
hint of irony.
Should I go first?
Yeah.
I mean, one I really love just the comparison between Lord of the Rings and this book. I think this could actually be a repeat Times column, which just starts every book review with, if I was going to place it in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But for me, the whiskey, I'm not a big bourbon drinker, so you know, it's never been particularly my fancy, but I thought this one was very nice, very drinkable. Like we were saying before, socially,
Where would you place it?
It's perfect. It's definitely second, so I would not. The Pendragon is still top for me. The Smokehouse was just a fist of peatiness.
I feel like the Pendragon would have been better. Sorry, not the Pendragon. The Smokehead would have been better suited for Dante's Inferno.
Yeah,
we have
probably.
really got into the deep dark peat.
Probably, the sulphur.
Yeah.
You would have started to sense the sulphur. But no, I'd put it second. And actually, I'd put the book there as well. So for me, Clockwork Orange is still above it. I agree with Will that I think I've actually appreciated the book more through discussion. And I think that's what's key about it. And I think that in part that's the beauty of it, because a superficial point of view, the story is quite bland, and then there's a lot of criticism you can have of it. But actually, there's interwoven elements that, at least for a discussion, are really, really interesting. So in the below Clockwork Orange.
So for myself, the drink and the book go hand in hand, which is sadly at the bottom.
That's
Interesting.
I know it's pretty bad. The drink, I both put them. I both put them as a 6 out of 10. So the drink, it's good. I can drink it. I'd happily drink it in the future. And going towards the book, I enjoy the book a bit. And the thing I found most interesting about the book was looking at Obie's community back in the village. But when he got back to the town and the arguments going on, I was sort of already expecting them. Nothing came as a surprise. It's only when he went back to the village that I found it genuinely interesting.
No, I have to agree with both Will and Luke on this. Reading the book, it was quite vanilla, but actually, when the kind of discussions unfolded, it revealed so much more than really I understood on the first read. And for that, in my own view, was actually it brought the book to life. So in that way, I really have to credit it. So if I was doing the review, I would definitely put it in front of Dante's Inferno, but definitely not Clockwork Orange. In terms of the whiskey, which is a bourbon, which is Wild Turkey 101, I liked it. It was easy drinking. And I would I would put it in front of the Smokehead. Or was it Smokehead?
Yep.
Yeah.
Smokehead. Yeah.
But not quite the pen. Have nice smooth drinking that I like. But a good attempt. At, pleasing my palate. So all in all, a great night. And lastly, I would just like to thank everyone here for making another Whiskey and Words. So thank you very much.